Hey friends, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about how to unlock your purpose and to live without regret. And joining us today to have this conversation is Dr. Jordan Grumet. The untimely passing of his father, an oncologist, sparked his journey towards a medical career. He completed his studies at the University of Michigan and earned his medical degree from Northwestern University. This path led him to specialize in internal medicine and ultimately to provide passionate care for the terminally ill in hospice. His unique blend of medical expertise and financial acumen resulted in a book in 2022 called Taking Stock, a hospice doctor's advice on financial independence, building wealth, and living a regret-free life. And today we're talking about his latest book, The Purpose Code, How to Unlock Meaning, Maximize Happiness, and Leave a Lasting Legacy. There's some concepts here that I think are going to give you a really clear roadmap about how to align with your purpose in a way that feels abundant and doable. And I'm excited to share this conversation with you. Before we dive into the show, please take a second to follow it on your podcast player. There's a name change happening this year, and I want to make sure you get every new episode. And if you've yet to subscribe to my newsletter, I'd love to have you be a part of the community. You can find that link right on your podcast player with all of the show notes and resources discussed today. Okay, my friends, on that note, let's get right into the show. Here we go. Jordan, I'm so happy to have you on the show today. Purpose is a subject that we cover a lot on the show and one that I think people are searching for. And I think you're going to tell us that searching isn't the right approach. But before we get there, I think your background sounds really interesting. And I'm just curious, I know you're a hospice doctor, but also a personal finance expert and author and podcaster, and you cover purpose. So just take us a little bit back a little bit so we can understand what led you to where we are today and talking about your upcoming book, The Purpose Code.
Well, it all started when I was 7 years old. My father was a physician and he was 40 and he died suddenly. He was rounding in the hospital. He had a brain aneurysm. And I thought I could cosmically fix the problems of the world by stepping into his shoes and becoming a doctor like him. So at the time I had a learning disability. I was struggling to learn how to read, but everything kind of got better. I took on this moniker of following in his footsteps and eventually went to medical school. I became a physician and quickly burned out. I realized that I was trying to co-opt his version of purpose, but it didn't really fit me that very well. I liked being a doctor, but I didn't like the paperwork. And often I felt overwhelmed and stressed. And I was lucky enough, my parents had modeled this really wonderful financial behavior. And so I copied them. And at some point, I was basically blogging about medicine, writing about what it felt like to be a doctor. And this guy wrote me, his name was Jim Dolly, the White Coat Investor, and he wanted me to review his book about money and being a doctor. And I read his book and realized that I was kind of financially independent. I had enough money that I probably didn't need to work anymore. And I was kind of emphatically excited that I was, could leave being a doctor and do whatever I wanted. And then I realized I had no idea what I wanted or who I wanted to be. And I wasn't ready to give up the only identity and purpose I'd ever known.
Yes.
And so that started a process of getting things I didn't like in my job. I gave up my practice. I gave up nights and weekends. And the only thing I held on to was the one thing I really loved doing, the thing I would do even if I wasn't being paid for, which was hospice medicine. I was a hospice medical director. It was almost like a side hustle, something I was doing on the side apart from my practice, but I realized I loved that. So I got rid of everything but that. And that left all these hours left in my schedule. And I started pursuing things that I'd always known I liked, but I never gave myself permission to do, like writing, public speaking, eventually podcasting. And because personal finance had gotten me there, I focused on personal finance. I started a blog, then a podcast, and I would be having my podcast and have these financial independence people on, these authors, these entrepreneurs, all these experts. And I'd be asking them about money and they could tell me everything about wealth. But when I'd ask them things like, what is enough? And why do you do all this? I would get blank stares.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, the answers to those type of questions weren't coming from my finance people. They were coming from my hospice patients who were on death's doorstep and talking about what they really regretted never having the energy, courage, or time to do. They
Yeah.
regretted not being their best version of themselves. And I wanted to bring that message to all of my personal finance people. So I wrote a book called Taking Stock, which was what the dying could teach us about money and life. And one of the main premises is that we should take purpose, identity, and connections and actually put them first and
Mm.
then build a financial framework around them. And I went to market this book with that main premise, and people would come up to me at the end of my talks angry. And the first time this happened, I thought it was a one off, but then it kept happening. And people would look at me and they'd say, "Look, you're telling me to find my purpose, and I have no idea what my purpose is. I've been searching for it forever, and it's
Yes.
really making me upset. Stop telling me to find my purpose." And of course, that sent me down the rabbit hole of studying purpose. And I found some contradictory things.
Okay.
Like the main studies show that purpose in life indeed is connected to health, longevity, and happiness. They're totally clear studies that show this. On
Yes.
the other hand, there are other studies that show up to 91% of people at some point in life have what's called purpose anxiety. The idea that finding their sense of purpose actually makes them stressed and frustrated. And so I
Yes.
was left with a big question. How can purpose be both of these things, both the most frustrating, but also the most important? And the answer I came to is that purpose is probably not one thing, but two. And one of those things is probably more associated with anxiety, while the other is more associated with the health, happiness, and longevity. And so that's why I wrote the book, The Purpose Code, to take something that feels very ephemeral and difficult to find and turn it into something really tangible and straightforward.
Absolutely. And in the book, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, you talk about little p purpose and big P purpose. And you say one of them is the path forward and the other is not. And that some people might challenge that or be like, wait, why is he coming up with this conclusion? And in that part of the book, that's literally what I was thinking. And so it was funny. I was like, oh, you're anticipating the resistance to this mindset. And part of me wonders too, like in the United States, we're so, we love talking about those big success stories and the Jeff Bezoses and the Elon Musks and the Sarah Blakeleys, these like success stories that seem overnight. What people don't realize is that they worked 100 hours a week and probably gave up the rest of their lives to create that. But that is seen as success. And so we think this is the model we're supposed to pursue. And if we're not going for the biggest, most audacious goal, we've failed already before we've even started.
And we've pretty much been taught this in American society. So first and
Yes.
foremost, yes, there's two different types of purpose, big P purpose, little p purpose. The
Yes.
very quick thumbnail, big P purpose is big, audacious, goal-oriented purpose. Think in America, if you can think it, you can build it. This is becoming the billionaire, having the eight-figure business, becoming president, curing cancer, all this really big stuff. And
Yes.
it's very much all or nothing. Either you succeed or you fail. And usually it's winner takes all. Only a few people can become billionaires. Only one person every 4 years is going to become president. Little p purpose, on the other hand, is very abundance mindset oriented. So if you think of big P purpose as scarcity, little p purpose is all about process. So if you enjoy the process of doing what you're doing, then that can be purposeful for you. And so instead of being all or nothing, it really is all or all. And it's really difficult to fail. So that's big P purpose versus little p purpose. So let's talk about American society and why we get this messed up.
Yes.
Everyone is telling us that we should be going after big, audacious purpose. Social media. So we have all these influencers that are showing us images of six-pack abs and wearing designer clothes and traveling the world and running a seven-figure business, but they're doing it to have you buy something from them or follow them so they can make money. The truth of the matter is, most of us don't have the genetics to have six-pack abs. Maybe we are not as privileged, don't have as much money, and live in a food desert and eat more fast food than healthy food. Maybe we just don't have the interest. Like to get six-pack abs, you got to really eat right and work out many hours, et cetera, et cetera. So they're selling us things we don't have agency over, and only a few people are going to succeed. So of course it doesn't feel good. That's social
Yes.
media. Look at marketing, same thing. Marketers want to sell us stuff, so they send us images that really look beautiful, but they're full of big, audacious purpose of living the perfect life because they want to make money off of us. But it's not just social media and marketers. Even our families and societies tell us when it comes to, for instance, career, you want to be a doctor or lawyer or CPA. They kind of give you these visions of purpose that are canned, that are
Yeah.
knowable, and that are
Yeah.
hard to achieve. And so it's not surprising that most of us think that if we don't go after these things, we're not being worthy. But again, the problem is in order to accomplish a lot of these things, you got to be the right person at the right time, saying the right things with a lot of luck and the right genetics. And the truth of the matter is usually one ingredient is missing. So we're setting ourselves up for purpose anxiety. We're setting ourselves up for failure. And so that's why Big P purpose is everywhere. And yet it's so frustrating.
You have dedicated a whole chapter to something called the climb, and I loved this. Can you take my audience and I into this concept that you called the climb, and let us know? Maybe you could even use an example from your life how you used it. There was a woman whose story you tell who loved horses that used it. Whatever feels right to you to share that might be applicable to my audience.
So I start by saying, and you've said it already, you don't find purpose, you create or build it. It's something we actually have agency over, it's under our control. But it is true, we have to decide what to build or create purpose around. And I call these purpose anchors. And so purpose anchors are those inklings, those beckonings of things that are important to us that we then build a life of purpose around. Finding those purpose anchors, I talk about it a lot in the book, but there's lots of different ways to do it. But I would give you that a lot of people actually deep down know what they love, especially like when you're going to sleep and you're dreaming that dream right before you lose consciousness. A lot of us know what's important, whether that's becoming an author or whether it's doing some kind of work or interacting with some types of people. We mostly know, and those are wonderful purpose anchors. But here's the problem. Knowing what your purpose anchors are is sometimes even the easiest part. Purpose is all about action. And so we have to take action. So the climb is the actual actions we take to build or create a life of purpose around a purpose anchor. Let me give you an example.
Please.
I love communicating and I love having deep conversations. So for me, that's a purpose anchor. So my climb became podcasting. Podcasting is the action I took. I created a podcast in order to build upon that purpose anchor to build little p purpose. Now let's talk about why podcasting is little p purpose for me and not big P purpose for me and why this is a really good climb. I could decide that I want to get 1 million downloads a week on my podcast. That would be a big, audacious version of purpose. Very, very hard to actually accomplish that. And in order to do that, I could do a bunch of things. I could start getting on social media all the time. I could start paying to have a marketing person. I could start doing all these kind of things, but I wouldn't really enjoy the process of doing those things. And that's why having 1 million downloads a week becomes big P purpose. I've started on a climb, which is podcasting, but that climb has turned into something negative where I'm spending most of my time doing things I don't like in order to reach this goal. And let's say I reach that goal, most likely I'm going to want to double it or double down and do even more because I'm not going to just be happy having 1 million downloads a week. I mean, you got to keep moving forward.
Right.
Or God forbid, what if I can't keep those 1 million downloads a week? What if I have loss aversion? I'm doubly afraid of losing it than I was of ever not building it. So that's how it becomes big P purpose. Well, how does it stay little P purpose? Well, podcasting for me is little P purpose because from the moment I get behind the microphone and start interviewing someone, I love that time. That hour I spend interviewing someone is the best hour of my day. And even if no one ever downloads that episode, it was still very worth my time. So this is a very good climb for me. It's filled with little P purpose. And I can even build in some incremental gain. So getting 1 million downloads a week is probably something I have pretty little control over, at least is very difficult. But I can study how to be a better interviewer. I can listen to good podcasters. I can read blogs about interview skills. These are all things I have agency over, and I can build some incremental gain into this. And I can even have goals. I can say, you know what, 1 million might be too much, but I'd love to have 50,000 downloads a month. That's something that's a little bit more reachable. But here's the thing. I can have goals and it can still be little P purpose. because I still love getting behind the microphone. And at the end of the month, if I got 30,000 downloads instead of 50, that's fine. If I got 5,000 downloads instead of 50, I still enjoy the process of making the podcast. And so that's what a climb looks like. And so what I believe we should all do is build multiple climbs in our life. Some might be lifelong, like I hope to podcast forever. Some might be fleeting, like you might enjoy doing something for a week or a month or the people you do that thing with, and then all of a sudden you don't anymore. Some can feel frivolous. I love reading detective novels, and I spend a lot of time, 1 or 2 hours a day, reading for pleasure, not self-help, nothing like that. Some of it could change the world. Maybe you do like volunteering to do something that really impacts people. As long as you enjoy the process of doing it, it's a healthy climb. But climbs become unhealthy when they become too goal oriented, when you don't enjoy the process of doing it anymore, when they steal your time away from something that you'd rather be doing. Those are all signs that maybe this climb isn't working for you anymore. So the climb is just purpose in action. It's what we build around those purpose anchors. And I think, again, when we're looking at that schedule, we want to fill it up with as many climbs as possible.
Okay. I want to kind of break down a few of the things that you said. So the first is that, and I love this idea that there can be many climbs. So would you say, I'm just curious that let's go into purpose a little deeper. Is the heart of the purpose the same and then the ways that you express it branched, or that we have multiple uh purpose
Purpose
focus?
anchors.
Yeah, purpose
Yeah.
anchors. Yes.
Yeah. So I do coaching and I do the process with people all the time. And we go through exercises and we actually find 10 or 15 different purpose anchors. And then for each purpose anchor, we find 10 or different climbs. The key is this is really abundant. And here's the funny thing. I tell people we can find a bunch of purpose anchors and we can find a bunch of climbs. And then I want you to throw a dart at a dartboard and pick 2 or 3 and drop the rest for now.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah.
Because otherwise it becomes overwhelming. It doesn't even really matter what the purpose anchor is as long as it excites you. The
Yes.
really important work is the building and creating you do around that purpose anchor. And that's that abundance I want to give to people. Purpose seems so ephemeral and difficult to reach and seems
Right.
so scarce. But what I'm trying to tell you is you could have 10 or 15 different purpose anchors and you could create 10 or 15 different climbs around each purpose anchor. And there is purpose everywhere you look, but you've got to do the work. Purpose is all about action. It's about present and future, and it's about action, and you've got to take that action. And so I think it can be whatever you want it to be, actually, as long as it's process oriented, it's not goal focused, and you enjoy those moments you're doing it.
Okay. And that's at the heart of it, the definition of the little p purpose.
Correct.
Okay. And some people get stuck. So they don't feel worthy of it. They don't believe they have the time for it. They don't prioritize themselves, especially women and especially moms. I just see this time and time again. And so they have that dream. Any advice on how to get themselves, because it does bring joy. Like I there's a fiction book that's been in me for a decade. So I pursue the podcasts and other things that I love to do. But this book is so dear to me, and yet I've not started. Why?
So there are a few things.
Yeah. And I'm using
First,
myself as an example for someone
yeah.
listening who might have that same goal or, something else.
First and foremost, they're the common excuses. I can't be happy or I can't do the things I want to do because I don't have enough money. But there are plenty of studies out there that actually show that most likely it isn't really money that brings happiness. It's interpersonal connections. And I'd argue the way that we get there is through purpose. There are also plenty of studies about time. The American Time Survey shows that your average American has about 5 hours of free time a day, and people in lower socioeconomic classes actually have slightly more. So it's probably not money and it's probably not time. Here's the thing. A lot of times when we're not accomplishing our sense of purpose, it's not a purpose problem, it's a meaning problem. So to go back, to be happy, I think we need meaning and purpose. Meaning is about the past and it's about our cognition, our thoughts about the past. It's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And happy people tend to tell themselves heroic stories like, I had this trauma, I had these problems, I overcame it, and that's why I am where I am today.
Yes.
And unhappy people tend to tell themselves victim stories. I had this trauma. I was thwarted. I continue to be thwarted. And that's where I am today. And I'll probably continue to be thwarted in the present and future. So that's meaning. And the journey of meaning is a journey to enough. Purpose, on the other hand, is about present and future. And it's not about thoughts and it's not about the past. It's about actions.
Hmm.
And so a lot of times we think we can either purpose our way to enough or we avoid purpose because we don't feel enough. And we think it's a purpose problem. And usually it's a meaning problem. So for someone like you, I'd probably ask, well, if this thing is really important to you, why aren't you doing it? And yes, at the beginning, you say, I might not have time, I might not have energy, I might not have enough money, etc. But usually, when we really delve into it, there's fears of failure, there's stories from our past about what we can and can't do, they're limiting beliefs. And most of those center around the fact that I don't feel like I'm enough, so I'm too scared to pursue this thing. And it's usually a meaning problem. And so, what
Hmm.
we really need to do is instead of working on purpose, we have to kind of go back and say, well, you're not working on this and you've expressed it so important. Let's talk about why. And that's when the litany of reasons start coming up and you start delving into them. And most of the time, that has to do with your past and trauma and the stories you tell yourselves about yourself. The last thing I always tell people is this idea of memento mori. So after we've set all that we just talked about aside,
Yes.
this idea that you could die any moment. My father died at 40 suddenly,
Hmm.
so I'm very aware of this.
Yeah.
And I deal with people on their deathbed every day. And I always hear about the things they regret they never had the energy, courage, or time to do. And so that's what I always ask people. I'm like, if you found out you were going to die tomorrow, what would you regret? Well, guess what? Regret is a great way of finding purpose anchors because you just flip it around. And instead of being on your deathbed where you have zero agency, time, or energy to do these things, you are young and healthy. You can turn that regret into a purpose anchor. So if writing a fiction book would be a deathbed regret for you, then it's time to start using that as a purpose anchor to build a life of purpose around. And if you find that internally it just doesn't sit right or you can't motivate, then it's time to really go back and look at your past and your trauma and your sense of meaning and trying to figure out why your sense of meaning doesn't help you feel enough to tackle this thing.
Love it. Can we go back to the hospice patient? So that work is so giving to the people who get to be heard and to be recognized in their last few days or whatever it might look like. Um, Biggest regrets are what are you hearing and things that people find that they are so glad that they did do, just because I think this will hit home with people because you're right. You use the term memento mori. And
Yeah.
so there's a, I had he was a entrepreneur, guest shark on Shark Tank. He was one of the guest sharks. And he has an app on his phone that reminds him of his mortality. I think it goes off 5 times a day.
Yeah, yeah. Here's the thing. Everyone is different and everyone is individual. And so
Yes.
the theme is always the same. The theme is, I regret I never had the energy, courage, or time to, but what we fill in that blank with is different for
Personal.
every
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
And so the idea behind memento mori is to kind of ask yourself that question on a regular basis and fix it. Because here's the thing. I get asked many, many times a year. People say, you're a hospice doctor. How do I have a good, peaceful death? People ask me this all the time. And I say, you know what? We have a saying in hospice, you tend to die the way you lived. So if you want to have a good death, you have to have a good life. And if you want to have a good life, you have to start thinking about these things that are deeply important to you now. And so I can't tell you what you will regret on your deathbed. Only you have an inkling of what those purpose anchors are, those inklings, those beckonings, those things that whisper to you. And everyone has a slightly different one. They're themes, like a lot of us want to be authors. That's a really common one. But what we do with that and how we do it is very unique to each of us. What I can tell you is what social media and marketers and society is telling you should be your version of what's important to you probably is more for them than for you. And
Yes.
you've got to start really thinking about what your purpose are, anchors are, and building that life of purpose for yourself. But if you can start doing that now, I can promise you, you'll have a lot less regrets on your deathbed. And met plenty people who die very peacefully who will tell you, I went after the things I wanted. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. From my last book, I have this wonderful story of a hospice patient who was in his 20s. He was at the top of his field in business, making tons of money, and he did something no one expected. He took a year off sabbatical and he wanted to go climb one of the highest mountains in the world. And that's what he wanted to do. And so he took a sabbatical. He took a year off. He exercised for the first 6 months, really built up his endurance. And then he went to do it. And he got about halfway up, and the weather changed, and they had to come back down. And he had used up his time. He eventually went back to work. And I met him in his 40s when he was dying from leukemia. And all he could talk about was being up on that mountain. And here's the interesting thing. He didn't care that he failed. He didn't care that he didn't make it. The fact is, this was important to him, and he had done what he needed to do to follow this passion. And I think we all should be like that. It doesn't matter if we succeed. It doesn't matter if we fail, but we have to get up on that mountain, or from the famous arena speech, we have to get in the arena and fight the good fight. And regardless what happens, that's what we're going to remember on our deathbed. We're going to remember the hard fought fights, whether we succeeded or failed. So you got to get in the arena. You got to take action. You got to discover your little p purpose. There's no time like the present. We don't know how much of this time we get, but these time slots are limited, and we want to fill them appropriately.
So beautiful, Jordan. And you wrote about legacy, and it's something I always think to myself, oh, I don't care about legacy. But you reframed it in a way that I actually completely rethought, think about it differently now. And so I think of like my mom and all the lives she touched. Part of the reason I started the show is this invitation. Like I could have seen her be a fashion designer, all these different things, but she was really just not just, she's the matriarch. And we were the house that all the kids came over when, they were little. And at a reunion, two different of my brother's friends came up to me and said, I don't know what I would have done without your mom.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have made it. And I was like, she'll have more impact than I ever will. So you don't realize like the ripple effect of just being a loving, solid presence in someone's life. So thank you for the way. Talk to us about legacy before we wrap up today, because I really thought it was beautiful how you described it. Because I think, again, our understanding in this country is this legacy. You've got to, be known for millennia, for the ages, and have some statue in your name to be really like having left a legacy.
And the problem is that's big P purpose, and most of us will fail. Like I collected baseball cards when I was a little kid, and I wanted to be Mickey Mantle, but I didn't have the genetics, skill, time, interest, mentors, all those things. And I wasn't even willing to put in the work. So if that was my version of purpose, to be Mickey Mantle, I would have failed and had purpose anxiety. The best way I can explain why purpose and legacy are so intimately connected is to talk about my maternal grandfather. So my maternal grandfather died in the 1960s, 10 years before I was born. So I never met him.
Okay.
But he had a very defined sense of little p purpose. He loved math, not because it helped anyone or fixed anything. He just loved math. Because he loved math, he became an accountant. And back in the 1950s, my mom, who was a little girl, would sit on his lap and he would show her all his spreadsheets and what numbers went into what box. And of course, he had to do it manually then because there weren't computers to do it.
Of course.
And it lit him up. And so my mom saw him doing this thing that lit him up, and she tried on that identity to see if it would fit her. And she found that she indeed loved math too. So she eventually became a CPA. And when I was a little kid, I had a learning disability and I couldn't learn how to read. In fact, when the other kids were on their basic readers, I was coloring in a coloring book. And I would have thought all was lost, but I, like my mother, had taken on that identity, that sense of purpose. I loved math too. So I was top in my class at math. So even though I couldn't read, I had this confidence that if I could figure out math, I must be okay. I can figure out reading. Eventually, I got over that learning disability. I became a doctor, a very highly mathematical field. And one day, I was seeing a patient in the hospital who had been admitted over and over again at death's doorstep, dehydrated. And I noticed a mathematical relationship between two of his lab tests. And we made a rare diagnosis, which was actually treatable with a simple medication. He stopped getting dehydrated. He stopped coming to the hospital.
Wow.
This guy was a pastor in his local neighborhood, and he took in runaways, and he would provide them social services and food, and if they're old enough, jobs. And so let's think about this. My maternal grandfather, who died in the 1960s, who I never met, him pursuing a sense of little p purpose changed someone's life 60 years later and hundreds of miles away. Like a pebble dropped in the ocean, it displaced a touch of water, and that water became a wave that at times grew bigger with other waves. At other times it dissipated, but it's still coming onto sandy shores in multiple different places. No one remembers his name. He's not written in any history books, but his life mattered. That's impact. That's legacy. And yes, we can try to cure cancer. We can try to become billionaires, but most likely we're going to fail. But if we do the things that light us up, we will connect to other people and we'll change the world. And that's what I think we all can do. That's a legacy and an impact that everyone can reach for.
Jordan, I've loved this conversation so much. We are all interconnected. And that example you gave is a perfect example of how we do everything that we do touches everyone else in some way that we may never know. Those kids that the pastor helped don't understand that it came really from your grandfather because you saved his life. So it's such a beautiful story and example. Before we wrap up, is there anything I didn't ask that you want to make sure that the women listening take away from this conversation today?
I just want to say purpose is abundant and it's within reach. It's not impossible. It's not far away and out there. It's something you can reach for. And I believe it'll definitely make your life better. And the studies show at least that you'll live longer, be more healthy, and be happier.
And we all deserve that. Why are we here if not for that? Okay, so the Purpose Code is coming out soon. The name of the book is The Purpose Code, How to Unlock Meaning, Maximize Happiness, and Leave a Lasting Legacy, which I invite all the women to pick up a copy. Jordan, where do I send them to find you in the book?
The easiest place to go is jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. There you can find links to both my books, Taking Stock and The Purpose Code, as well as all the places I create content, currently the Earn and Invest podcast and The Purpose Code Substack. But there are also links to my old medical blog as well as personal finance blog. All of that is at jordangrumet.com.
Perfect. And that will be on your podcast player right on your phone, which you can access with a link to Jordan's book. And please share this interview with all of your friends. This was such a beautiful conversation. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, friend, I have one request before we sign off today. If you've gained any value from any of the interviews that you've tuned into, would you take just 1 minute and leave a 5-star rating and review over on Apple Podcasts? It's actually how more women can find the show, and I want to continue growing a community of women who are loving themselves and living full on. So thank you for all of your support, and I look forward to being back with you next week. Bye for now.
This podcast is presented for entertainment and educational purposes only. Any information provided is not intended to be a substitute for medical, mental health, or other professional advice. Seek out your trusted healthcare provider or other qualified professional for all matters dealing with your health and well-being. Any opinions or information provided by a guest are their own and not those of Michelle Lamoureux or the company.